The jungle moon Nock Zero was alive with movement. Towering, twisted trees with glowing veins stretched into the dark sky, their branches tangled like the arms of sleeping giants. Strange, bioluminescent creatures slithered along the roots, their faint blue light casting eerie shadows. The air was thick and humid, filled with the distant calls of unseen beasts. Princess Silara moved carefully through the undergrowth, her crystalline skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. She was tall and elegant, her form both alien and graceful. The Vaylari were a species known for their almost glass-like skin, which reflected colors depending on their emotions. Silara's usually silver-blue hues were now deep violet, a sign of unease. She wasn't alone. Around her, a group of Vaylari diplomats and human envoys moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the jungle. The humans, dressed in reinforced exosuits, carried energy rifles, while the Vaylari relied on their psionic senses to detect danger. Leading the human group was Commander Dane Varric, a battle-hardened soldier with sharp, calculating eyes. His dark hair was cut short, and a jagged scar ran across his left cheek, a reminder of past battles. Unlike the diplomats, Dane had his hand resting on his sidearm, a clear sign that he trusted nothing about this place. "Are you sure this is the right path?" Dane asked, his voice steady but firm. Silara didn't look at him. Instead, she closed her eyes, sensing the energies around her. "Yes," she said, her voice smooth but tense. "The ancient ruins are near. The alliance between our species depends on this discovery." Dane exhaled sharply. "Yeah. Let's just hope we don't get killed before shaking hands." Just as he spoke, the jungle went deathly silent. The buzzing of insects, the rustling of distant creatures, gone in an instant. Dane stopped walking. His soldier's instincts flared like a warning siren in his head. He held up a fist, signaling the group to halt. "Something's wrong," he muttered. The Vaylari tensed. Silara felt a strange shift in the air, something ancient and hungry stirring beneath the surface of the planet. Then, the ground trembled. A low, guttural growl echoed through the jungle, vibrating through the trees. The shadows shifted. From the darkness, something huge and grotesque moved, its body covered in twisting, metallic plates fused with pulsating organic tissue. The Vorik Maw had found them. Silara barely had time to react before chaos erupted. The creature lunged from the foliage, its enormous mouth splitting into writhing tendrils. One of the Vaylari screamed as the beast snatched him up, swallowing him whole in a blink. Dane was already moving, firing energy rounds into the creature's armored hide. "Move, get to cover." The jungle exploded into violence. Silara tried to summon her psionic energy, but the creature's presence disrupted her mind, clouding her senses. She stumbled back, watching in horror as the beast's many eyes locked onto her. Then, it struck. A whip-like tendril lashed out faster than lightning. Silara gasped as it coiled around her waist, yanking her off the ground. "No." Dane turned, his eyes widening as he saw Silara being pulled toward the creature's gaping maw. He leaped forward, but it was too late. The Vorik Maw swallowed her whole. The beast let out a horrifying shriek before vanishing back into the jungle, leaving behind only broken trees and a stunned, horrified silence. Dane's fists clenched. His heart pounded. The Vaylari were already falling back, their leaders shouting orders. "She's gone," one of them said. "We must retreat." But Dane didn't move. His jaw tightened. "Like hell she is," he growled. Without another word, he took off into the jungle, chasing the monster alone. Because if there was one thing the universe would learn today, it was never a good idea to take something from a human and expect to keep it. Dane Varric moved like a predator, his boots pounding against the damp jungle floor. His breath was steady, his heart a controlled drumbeat. The Vorik Maw had vanished into the shadows, dragging Princess Silara into the depths of the wilderness. But Dane wasn't about to let that stand. The Vaylari had given up, retreating in fear, But humans didn't retreat, especially not when there was still a chance. He tapped a command on his forearm gauntlet, activating his visor's tracking mode. The jungle came alive in his display, thermal readings flickering in layers of blue, green, and red. The beast's massive heat signature still pulsed ahead, a shifting, grotesque blur deeper in the undergrowth. Dane clenched his jaw. It was moving fast. He sped up, dodging thick vines and twisted roots, his mind calculating the best approach. Sci-Fi is still alive. She had to be. The Vorik Maw didn't kill instantly. It absorbed its prey, breaking them down over time. He still had a window. Not much of one, but enough. A warning flashed in his visor. Movement detected. Dane dropped low just as something huge came crashing through the trees. A smaller Vorik spawn, its many limbs skittering as it lunged at him. No time for this. Dane rolled aside, coming up with his pistol already raised. A quick 3-shot burst, one to the joint, one to the torso, and one to the skull-like core. The creature collapsed mid-lunge, its screech cut short. Dane didn't slow down. He vaulted over its corpse, pushing himself harder. His armor was good, but it wouldn't hold forever against the jungle's dangers. The real threat was still ahead. Inside the belly of the beast, Sci-Fi's world was dark and suffocating. A thick, pulsing membrane surrounded her, squeezing her body like a tightening grip. She could feel waves of heat rolling through the creature's insides, an unnatural energy pressing against her mind. Her usually radiant skin was dim, her body weak. The Vorik Maw was leeching her life force, breaking her down bit by bit. But Sci-Fi was Valeri royalty. She wouldn't fade so easily. Focusing every bit of her remaining strength, she reached out with her psionic abilities, trying to connect to something, anything. And that's when she felt it. A presence. Dane. It was faint, like a distant flame in an ocean of darkness, but it was there. Her heart quickened. He's coming. The thought steadied her. She would not die here. A battle against the jungle. Dane burst through a wall of vines, spotting the beast just ahead. The Vorik Maw had stopped near a massive, stone-like nest, its massive, grotesque form shifting as it prepared to digest its captured prey. Dane's grip tightened on his rifle. You picked the wrong damn princess. He tapped his gauntlet, activating shock grenades on his belt. A click. A throw. The jungle erupted in light as the grenades detonated, sending a shockwave that ripped into the beast's armored hide. The Vorik Maw let out a horrific shriek, its tendrils spasming wildly. Dane used the moment to charge, firing into its exposed flesh. The creature lurched, its massive body twisting in pain, but it wasn't dead yet. With a sickening crack, it turned toward him, its maw splitting open. Rows of writhing, razor-like appendages lunged at him. Dane dodged, his armor taking a glancing hit. His HUD flickered, warning him of damage. But he didn't stop. He only needed one opening. And then he saw it. The beast's underbelly, where its digestive sacs pulsed beneath translucent skin. Dane grinned grimly. Bingo. He slung his rifle onto his back, pulling his combat blade instead. With a deep breath, he launched himself straight at the monster, aiming for the one spot that would make it regret ever crossing a human. Dane charged straight at the monster, his combat blade glinting under the pale jungle light. The Vorik Maw roared, its grotesque mouth splitting wider, revealing rows of tendrils lined with jagged organic plating. The smell of decay rolled over him, thick and suffocating. No fear, no hesitation. He slid beneath one of its snapping tendrils, rolled to the side, and drove his blade deep into the creature's underbelly. A wet, sickening rip filled the air as the blade tore through its pulsing flesh. The Vorik screeched, its entire body convulsing. Dane didn't stop. He ripped the blade upward, slicing through the sac where Sci-Fi was trapped. A thick, translucent membrane tore open, spilling dark fluids onto the jungle floor. Something shifted inside. a faint shimmer of crystalline skin, weak but still alive. Silara. Dane reached in, grabbed hold of her, and pulled her free. Her normally radiant, silver-blue skin was dull, her breathing weak, but she was alive. The Vorik maw convulsed in agony, its massive form thrashing wildly. Dane didn't have time to waste. He hoisted Silara over his shoulder and bolted. Behind him, the Vorik let out a deafening howl, its body collapsing into spasms as its inner fluid spilled out. The ground trembled under its dying rage. Dane didn't look back. He only ran, a desperate escape. The jungle was a blur of shadows and light as Dane pushed forward. Silara's body was cold against his armor, her breath shallow. His heads-up display flickered with alerts. His suit was damaged, oxygen levels running low. But none of that mattered. He tapped his gauntlet, sending a distress beacon to any nearby human forces. "Come on, someone hear this." Silara stirred weakly in his arms. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came for me." Dane smirked, still focused on the path ahead. "Yeah, well, humans don't leave people behind." She let out a soft, tired laugh. Her fingers gripped weakly at his armor. "Foolish, but brave." Dane felt something shift behind him, a deep guttural growl. His muscles tensed. He turned his head slightly, and his blood ran cold. The Vorik wasn't dead. Its broken, half-collapsed body was still moving, its glowing eyes locked onto them. Dane cursed under his breath. Silara felt his tension and turned her head slightly. Even in her weakened state, she understood. "Put me down," she murmured. Dane ignored her and ran faster. "Dane," she said, stronger this time. "Put me down." Reluctantly, he slowed and lowered her onto her feet. She swayed unsteadily, but she raised a hand. Her Velari energy, once drained, now flickered around her fingertips. She turned toward the wounded Vorik, her silver-blue eyes glowing. Dane watched as her entire body pulsed with light, a slow but powerful buildup of psionic force. The Vorik maw let out a deep, snarling sound, sensing the power gathering before it. Silara took a slow breath, then unleashed everything. A shockwave of pure psionic energy erupted from her, ripping through the jungle like a storm. The Vorik let out a final wretched scream before its massive form disintegrated, breaking apart in glowing fragments. Silence fell. The jungle was still once more. Dane let out a breath, shaking his head. "I had it handled, you know." Silara turned to him, exhausted but smiling faintly. "Of course." And then she collapsed. Dane caught her before she hit the ground. Above them, the sky lit up, human rescue ships descending fast. They had made it. But something told Dane this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Dane sat on the edge of the medbay cot, arms crossed, watching over Silara. The soft hum of the human rescue ship vibrated beneath his feet as they soared through space. The air inside was crisp and sterile, filled with the quiet beeps of medical monitors. Silara lay still on the cot, her crystalline skin slowly regaining its glow. The dull, drained look she had when he pulled her from the creature's belly was fading. Her natural silver-blue radiance was returning, though still dim. She was alive. That was what mattered. Dane exhaled, rubbing a hand over his scared cheek. "You're staring." Her voice was soft, but carried the usual calm confidence he was beginning to recognize. Dane smirked. "Yeah, you were half dead a few hours ago. Thought I'd make sure you're still in one piece." Silara's lips curled into a faint smile, though she didn't open her eyes. "I am recovering." Her breathing was stronger now, steadier. The Velari healing process worked fast, but she had been close to the edge. Too close. Dane leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You were lucky." Silara's violet eyes fluttered open, glowing softly. "It was not luck," she murmured. "You came for me." Dane shrugged. "Would have been a bad look to let an alien princess get eaten on my watch." Silara chuckled lightly. A practical excuse. Yet, I do not believe you truly think that way. Dane didn't reply. Because honestly, she was right. He hadn't gone after her for orders or politics or alliances. He had gone because it was the right thing to do. Because that was what humans did. A new threat. The ship's comms unit beeped, breaking the moment. Dane sighed and tapped his wrist device. Varric here. A voice crackled through the channel. Commander, we need you on the bridge. Dane stood. On my way. Before he left, he glanced at Silara. Get some rest, princess. She smiled faintly. Try not to start another battle without me. Dane snorted. No promises. The bridge. When Dane stepped onto the command deck, he immediately sensed the tension. The crew was rigid, their eyes locked onto the holo-displays. Captain Rourke, a broad-shouldered woman with sharp features, turned to him. We've got a problem. Dane folded his arms. What kind? Rourke gestured to the main display, where a grainy image flickered. A Vaylari cruiser, one of Silara's people's ships. It was floating motionless in deep space, dark and silent. No distress signals, the communications officer said. No response to hails. It's just dead. Dane narrowed his eyes. Survivors. Rourke shook her head. Unknown. Something was wrong. Dane could feel it. He turned to the sensor officer. How long until we reach it? 5 minutes. Dane exhaled. His gut was telling him this wasn't just a malfunction. This was something else. Something worse. A new enemy in the dark. 5 minutes later, Dane stood in the airlock, his armor sealed and weapons ready. Behind him, a squad of human marines and 2 Vaylari guardians prepared their own gear. Silara had insisted on coming. Dane had tried to argue against it. She had ignored him. Now she stood beside him, her elegant silver armor glowing faintly with psionic energy. Ready? Dane asked. Silara nodded. Let us see what awaits us. The airlock hissed open. Beyond it was darkness. A dead ship, and a new horror waiting within. The airlock doors hissed open, revealing the dark, silent corridors of the Vaylari cruiser. Dane stepped forward first, his rifle raised, scanning every shadow. Behind him, his squad of human marines moved in a disciplined formation. Their armor gleamed under the dull emergency lights, but their fingers were tense on the triggers. Silara followed closely, her psionic aura glowing faintly, casting soft light against the metallic walls. The ship was too quiet. Too still. The Vaylari weren't the type to abandon a vessel, yet there was no sign of the crew. Dane tapped his visor display, switching to thermal mode. Nothing. No heat signatures. No movement. Just the cold, empty void. We should split up, suggested Sergeant Kalos, a hardened Marine with a scared jaw and piercing dark eyes. Cover more ground. Dane shook his head. No. We stick together. Kalos grunted but didn't argue. Dane turned to Silara. Anything? Silara closed her eyes, reaching out with her psionic senses. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a flicker, a presence. Her eyes snapped open, glowing brighter. Something is here, she whispered. Something. Wrong. Dane's grip on his rifle tightened. Yeah. Figured as much. The first clue. They moved deeper into the ship, their boots barely making a sound. The Vaylari architecture was sleek and elegant, with curving walls of silver and blue, but now everything looked twisted. The lights flickered weakly, as if the ship itself was dying. Then they found the first body. A Vaylari crew member, slumped against the wall, his once shimmering silver-blue skin now gray and cracked. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, his eyes black and hollow. What the hell? Whispered Private Soren, the youngest Marine. Silara knelt beside the body, her fingers hovering over his forehead. This is not natural, she said softly. His life force was drained. Dane scanned the body with his visor. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. Something had taken everything from this man, and they were still trapped inside with it. The whispering shadows. They pressed forward, tension thick in the air. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then Dane heard it. A sound. A whisper. Not in his ears. In his mind. His vision blurred for half a second, like something brushed against his thoughts. Then he heard his own voice whisper back at him, but it wasn't him. Turn around. Run. Leave her. Dane shook his head violently, clearing the intrusive thought. What was that? Kalos growled, gripping his weapon tighter. Silara's breath came sharp. A presence. It is. Testing us. Testing them. Dane hated that. He preferred enemies he could shoot. Stay sharp, he ordered. Then the lights flickered out completely, and the screaming began. The nightmare reveals itself. A Marine in the back, Corporal Vex, let out a choked scream. Dane spun around just in time to see shadows moving, wrapping around the man like tendrils. His body convulsed, his eyes turning pitch black as his very life was drained in seconds. The team opened fire, but the bullets passed through the darkness like smoke. Then the shadow moved and lunged. Dane tackled Silara out of the way just as a massive, shifting figure surged toward them. A nightmare of swirling void, humanoid but twisted, its face a gaping black hole. The Marines fell back, their weapons useless against the thing. Silara, breathless, pressed a hand to her temple. It is consuming them, she gasped. Their very essence. Dane gritted his teeth. Then we need to stop it. He grabbed a shock grenade, thumbed the trigger, and hurled it straight into the monster's form. The explosion of light filled the corridor, blasting the shadows away. The creature let out a piercing shriek, recoiling into the darkness. For the first time, it looked hurt. Silara's eyes flashed. Light. It fears light. Dane grinned. Well then. He pulled out another grenade. Let's burn this thing out. The air smelled like burned circuits and cold metal, the sharp tang of ozone from the shock grenade still lingering. Dane didn't waste a second. He loaded another grenade into his launcher, his grip steady. If this thing hates light, he muttered, let's give it more. Silara pushed herself to her feet, her silver-blue skin glowing faintly as she focused her psionic energy. She was still weak, but her eyes burned with determination. The shadow creature twisted and writhed, its form shifting unnaturally, almost like it was struggling to hold itself together. Then it lunged. Dane fired. The grenade exploded in a flash of white energy, filling the corridor with blazing light. The creature shrieked, its form splintering apart, writhing in agony. But it wasn't dead. The darkness crawled backward, slipping into the cracks of the ship, retreating deeper into the Valari vessel. Dane cursed under his breath. Figures. It's not gonna die easy. Silara wiped sweat from her brow. It is afraid. That means it can be defeated. Dane nodded, reloading his weapon. Then let's end this. The hunt begins. The team moved quickly through the dark corridors. Emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They found more bodies, Valari crew members, all drained of life. Their once radiant skin was ashen and cracked, their eyes hollow voids. Private Soren swallowed hard. What kind of monster does this? Silara's voice was calm but firm. Not a monster. Dane glanced at her. Then what is it? She hesitated before answering. A Voidborn. The squad exchanged nervous glances. Sergeant Kalos frowned. Never heard of it. You would not have, Silara said. They are ancient, creatures born from the emptiness between galaxies. She turned to Dane, her violet eyes sharp. They do not kill for hunger or survival. They consume to erase, to unmake. Dane exhaled. Great, so we're fighting something that shouldn't even exist. Silara nodded. Yes. Silence fell over the squad. Then Dane smirked. Well, that just means we get to be the first to kill one. A trap in the dark. They followed the trails of darkness, moving toward the ship's core. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then, movement. Dane barely had time to react before the darkness struck again. Tendrils of shadow lashed out from the walls, wrapping around one of the Marines. Corporal Vex. He let out a choked scream as the shadows pulled him into the wall, his body vanishing into the blackness. Dane fired his rifle, but the bullets passed through empty air. Then Vex's voice echoed, but it was wrong. Twisted. Dane, why didn't you save me? Dane's blood ran cold. That wasn't Vex anymore. Silara grabbed his arm. Do not listen. It feeds on doubt. On fear. Dane clenched his jaw. No fear. No hesitation. Burn it out, he ordered. The squad activated their suit lights, beams of brightness piercing the darkness. The shadows screamed, pulling away. For the first time, Dane saw its true form, a twisting mass of black tendrils, a shape that constantly shifted and flickered, as if reality itself was rejecting it. Silara stepped forward, her hands glowing with psionic energy. No more, she whispered. Then she unleashed a blast of pure light. The creature shrieked as the energy engulfed it, burning away the shadows. The entire ship rumbled, the walls shaking as the Voidborn let out one last horrifying scream. And then, silence. The darkness was gone. The ship's lights flickered back to life. Dane let out a slow breath. That's it. Silara frowned. For now. Dane narrowed his eyes. What do you mean for now? She met his gaze. This was only one. Dane's stomach tightened. There are more, she said. And just like that, the real fight was only beginning. Silence filled the Valeri cruiser as the last echoes of the Voidborn's death scream faded. Dane scanned the corridor, his rifle still raised, his heart still pounding. For the first time since stepping aboard, the ship felt empty, not just abandoned, but freed. Silara exhaled, the soft glow of her psionic energy dimming as she steadied herself. It is gone, she whispered. Dane wasn't convinced. For good. She hesitated before shaking her head. No, this one is destroyed, but others exist. Dane muttered a curse. Of course, it was never that easy. The survivor. The ship was dead, but they had one last mission, to find out if anyone was left alive. The team moved toward the command deck, past the lifeless Valeri crew members who had been drained by the Voidborn. Then Silara stopped suddenly, her glowing violet eyes widening. Wait, she breathed. Dane turned sharply. What? She took a step forward, placing her palm against a smooth silver door. There is life here. Dane didn't hesitate. He motioned to Sergeant Kalos, who stepped forward, hacking into the door panel. With a hiss, the doors slid open. Inside, curled in the corner of the dimly lit room, was a Valeri woman. Her silver-blue skin was pale, her breathing weak, but she was alive. Silara rushed to her side. She is in stasis shock, she said, pressing 2 fingers against the woman's temple. She has seen too much. Dane knelt beside them. Can you wake her? Silara nodded and focused. A soft glow spread from her fingers, wrapping around the woman like threads of light. Slowly, the Valeri's eyes fluttered open, glowing with faint, flickering light. She gasped, then suddenly tried to push away, her eyes filled with fear. Easy, Dane said, raising his hands. We're here to help. She stared at him for a long moment. Then her breathing steadied, and she whispered one word. Run. Dane's stomach tightened. What do you mean, run? The woman's voice trembled. It wasn't alone. Dane felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Silara's face darkened. The others are coming. A race against time. Dane turned to his team. We're done here. We need to move. Now. Sergeant Kalos didn't argue. Extraction team is already inbound. Dane activated his comms. Rourke, get the ship ready. We have a survivor, and we need to leave immediately. Captain Rourke's voice crackled through. Dane turned to Silara. Can she walk? Silara helped the weak Valeri to her feet. Barely, but we will not leave her behind. Dane nodded. Then let's move. The squad rushed back toward the airlock, their footsteps echoing through the ship. Then the lights flickered again. Silara froze mid-step. No, she whispered. The walls trembled. The air grew heavy. A deep, hollow sound echoed through the corridors. Not quite a voice, but something. Watching. Something approaching. Dane gritted his teeth. We are not dying on this ship. Escape under fire. The airlock came into view. On the other side, through the transparent force shield, Dane saw their rescue craft docking. They were almost there. Then, the shadows moved again. The Voidborn hadn't come alone. Two more twisting, shapeless figures emerged from the darkness, their forms flickering like living nightmares. The temperature plummeted, and the air filled with a low humming noise, like a chorus of voices whispering at once. Private Soren stumbled. I can hear them inside my head. Silara's eyes flashed with light. They are trying to break you. Do not listen. Dane raised his rifle. No more running. No more fear. We make our stand here. The last stand. The Voidborn lunged. Dane fired first, his bullets lined with energy charges, striking the nearest creature. It shrieks and recoiled, its form splintering for a moment. Silara stepped forward, her entire body glowing now, energy pulsing in waves around her. You do not belong here, she said, her voice steady. She thrust her hands forward, unleashing a blinding surge of pure light. The Voidborn reeled back, screaming, its form burning away in the radiance. The second charged at them, tendrils of darkness reaching for the team. Dane grabbed a flare from his belt, igniting it with a sharp flick. Choke on this, he muttered and hurled it into the creature's core. The flare exploded, sending white-hot light searing through the monster's form. The Voidborn screeched and twisted, its shape unraveling, until it faded into nothingness. The airlock slammed open behind them. Captain Rourke's voice blasted through their comms. Movie. Dane turned to Silara. Time to go. She nodded, helping the survivor forward. The team rushed through the airlock, sealing the door just as the last flickers of shadow slithered toward them. The ship detached from the Valeri cruiser, engines roaring to life. As they pulled away, Dane stared back at the dark, drifting wreckage. It was over. For now. The ship's engines roared as they pulled away from the Valeri cruiser, leaving the dark, lifeless wreck behind. Dane leaned against the bulkhead, his mind still racing. The Voidborn weren't just a nightmare from some forgotten past. They were real, they were growing, and worst of all, they were coming. Silara sat beside the Valeri survivor, her silver-blue fingers glowing faintly as she helped stabilize the woman's weak body. The survivor's voice was hoarse. You don't understand, she whispered. They are not hunting at random. They are testing us. Dane frowned. Testing. The woman nodded, her glowing violet eyes full of terror. This was a small attack. A probe. They are studying how we fight. Dane clenched his fists. And once they're ready, the woman looked up at him, her voice barely more than a whisper. They will erase everything. A war we cannot lose. Captain Rourke's voice came over the ship's comms. Dane, get up here. Now. Dane exchanged a glance with Silara before pushing himself off the bulkhead and heading for the bridge. As he stepped inside, the screens lit up with disturbing data, long-range scans showing massive void signatures moving through the outer edges of space. The Voidborn were mobilizing. Dane let out a slow breath. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Rourke shook his head grimly. Fleet Command just sent out an emergency alert. Multiple deep space colonies have gone dark. No distress calls. No survivors. Dane's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an invasion. This was extermination. Silara entered the bridge behind him, her expression serious as she took in the data. They are accelerating their attack. Dane's jaw clenched. Then we need to be faster. The message. Dane turned to Rourke. What's the plan? Rourke exhaled. The fleet is mobilizing near the Titan defense line. High Command wants every available warship ready to engage. Dane nodded. We'll be there. Then the comms crackled again. But this time, the transmission wasn't from Fleet Command. A distorted voice came through, weak and broken. This is Commander Vashti of the UHS Guardian. We are under attack. A deep, unnatural static filled the transmission. Then a new voice spoke, cold, hollow, and inhuman. We see you. The signal cut to silence. The bridge was dead quiet. Silara's fingers curled into a fist. They are taunting us. Dane's grip tightened on his rifle. Not for long. The battle begins. The Titan defense fleet was already gathering when their ship arrived. Hundreds of warships filled the vastness of space, sleek human battleships, towering Veilari dreadnoughts, and even warfleets from other species. For the first time in history, the galaxy stood united against a single enemy. But would it be enough? Dane stepped into the war room, where admirals, generals, and alien commanders stood around a glowing battle map. Rourke spoke first. Fleet Command believes they'll strike at New Terra first. If they take that, they'll have a straight path to the core worlds. Silara studied the battle map. They will not fight a conventional war. They will spread through the shadows, take ships from within. If we lose control of our own forces, the battle is over before it begins. Dane nodded. Then we don't give them that chance. He looked around at the gathered leaders. It was time for humanity to do what it did best. Adapt, fight back, and win. The final stand. The alarms blared. Enemy fleet incoming. Dane rushed to the viewport. The Voidborn Armada had arrived. Massive, twisting black warships emerged from the void, their hulls shifting like liquid shadows. The human fleet opened fire, unleashing a storm of energy blasts, missiles, and railgun slugs. For a moment, it seemed like they were holding. Then the enemy ships started absorbing the attacks, the shadows consuming the firepower as if it were nothing. Dane's fists clenched. They're adapting. A black wave of darkness rippled out from the Voidborn fleet, tendrils reaching for the human ships, engulfing smaller cruisers instantly. Shields failing, a voice shouted over the comms. Dane didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and turned to Silara. We have to take the fight to them. She nodded. I will go with you. They rushed to the hangar, where the strike teams were loading into dropships. This wouldn't be a battle of ships and weapons alone. This would be a war fought in the shadows, in the halls of their own fleet, and humanity would not go quietly. The future of the galaxy. Dane strapped into the dropship, his pulse steady. Silara sat beside him, her eyes glowing. Are you afraid? She asked. He smirked. Always. She smiled. Good. Then you will fight harder. The dropship launched, heading straight for the Voidborn flagship. This was it. The final stand. Humanity's greatest battle had begun, and Dane wasn't planning to lose.